I'm Carol. Standing in the middle of the silent, stunned crowd, I watched as the empire my stepmother and stepsister had built on lies and deceit crumbled before my eyes. My father, Henry Thompson, stood tall, his voice firm as he held up the USB drive that contained all their treachery. "Amanda," he said, his voice cold and sharp. My stepmother, Amanda, turned to him, her smile frozen on her face. "Darling, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I watched it," he replied, his eyes fixed on her. "Every word." Amanda's face paled, and my stepsister, Lily, stood beside her, her expression one of pure panic. The room was deathly silent, and I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me. My mind flashed back to the days of my childhood. I grew up in a grand mansion in Boston, surrounded by luxury but lacking in love. My father was a successful businessman, building his company, Thompson Enterprises, from the ground up. In his world, appearances were everything. The house was always immaculate, the dinners were elaborate, and the smiles were fake. My mother passed away when I was young, and within months, Amanda moved in. She was a beautiful woman, with a smile that could light up a room, but there was a coldness in her eyes. She had a way of making me feel small, of belittling me with her words. And then there was Lily, her daughter. She was my father's favorite, the apple of his eye. I used to count how many times he said her name at dinner, as if it was a sign that I still existed if he remembered to say mine. I was always the outsider in my own family. Every family photo had me at the edge, with a half smile on my face. The only thing that felt real to me was my camera. At 17, I bought a camera with the money I earned from babysitting the neighbors' kids. It wasn't about art, it was my way of escaping the cold reality of my home. Through the lens, I could capture the truth, the small moments that people overlooked. A homeless man huddled in a doorway, a child's tear-streaked face. These were the real stories, the ones that no one wanted to see. When I turned 19, I left home. Amanda threw a polite farewell party, as if I was just a guest who was leaving. My father gave me a check and told me to call if I needed anything. I never did. I built a career as a documentary filmmaker, telling the stories of the underprivileged, the forgotten. But every time I turned off the camera, the silence of my past would come back to haunt me. One winter day, I received an email. "You are cordially invited to Henry Thompson's 65th birthday celebration. Black tie required." There was no greeting, no signature, just the invitation. For a long time, I stared at the screen. Most people would have deleted it, but I didn't. After a lifetime of being ignored, this invitation felt like a glimmer of hope, a chance to prove that I still mattered. As the party approached, I couldn't sleep. My small apartment in Boston felt like a prison. I told myself I was only going to film some B-roll for a new project, but deep down, I knew I was going to expose the truth. Then, my friend, Mia, showed up. She was an artist, always with a paintbrush in her hand and paint stains on her clothes. She plopped down on my couch and said, "You won't believe what I heard." I looked up from my camera gear, and I could see the seriousness in her eyes. "Lily was at the coffee shop downtown," she said. "She was talking to some guy, Jake, I think. She said Dad won't suspect a thing once the papers are signed." My heart skipped a beat. "What papers?" I asked. Mia shrugged. It sounded like business stuff, but I saw her phone screen. It had your dad's company logo on it. We spent the whole night digging. Mia remembered a shared cloud folder she used with Lily for an art project. The password was still the same. Inside, we found scanned contracts, emails, and a draft transfer form. Amanda and Lily were planning to transfer my father's shares in the company to Lily's name, using Jake as their silent partner. Every message was filled with arrogance. "Dad will thank me in the end," Lily had written. "Carol will never say a word. She's too weak." Reading those words felt like a punch in the gut. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the years of being pushed aside, of being made to feel like I didn't matter. Mia looked at me and said, "You could end them with this." I nodded, but the words got stuck in my throat. I could already picture my father's face if I exposed the truth. The disappointment, the humiliation. For a moment, I hated myself for still caring. I copied the files onto a small USB drive. It clicked shut, and I held it in my hand until it felt hot. This was my truth, my weapon. The morning of the party, Boston was covered in a thick fog. I packed my camera gear and the USB drive carefully. I put on a black dress that made me feel like I was going to war. As I closed my suitcase, I whispered to myself, "No more hiding." The drive to the mansion was like going back in time. The long driveway lined with oak trees, the iron gate that creaked open. But this time, the place seemed smaller, less intimidating. I parked my car and took a deep breath. Inside, the house was filled with people. The music was playing, and the champagne was flowing. Amanda was there, wearing a diamond necklace that probably cost more than my apartment. She smiled at me when she saw me, but there was a hint of annoyance in her eyes. "Carol," she said, "I'm surprised you came." I smiled back. "You invited me," I replied. She murmured, "Well, try not to make a scene." Her words were like ice, but I didn't flinch. I had been through worse. My father appeared a few minutes later. He was wearing a sharp suit, looking every bit the successful businessman. "Carol," he said, sounding surprised. "I'm glad you could make it." I nodded. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. He smiled politely and moved on, getting caught up in another conversation. That small dismissal was the spark that ignited my anger. I sat through the speeches, the toasts, and Amanda's perfect act. Every time she touched my father's arm, every time Lily laughed too loudly, I could feel the USB drive in my clutch getting heavier. When the dancing started, I slipped away and made my way to my father's office. The portraits on the wall seemed to watch me as I opened the door and placed the USB drive next to his nameplate. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't shaking. A few minutes later, my father found me there. He stopped in the doorway, looking at me with a confused expression. "Carol," he said softly, "Amanda said you'd left. You shouldn't be in here." "I know," I said, my voice steady. "I just needed to talk to you." He hesitated, then walked in. The lamplight shone on his face, and I could see the lines that time had etched. "You've grown so much," he said quietly. "You look like your mother." I let his words hang in the air. I wanted to tell him that my mother had been searching for his love, but I didn't. Instead, I slid the USB drive across the desk to him. He frowned. "What's this?" he asked. "The truth," I replied. "You deserve to know it before it's too late." His expression changed, first to confusion, then to irritation. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "Just watch it," I said. He sat down and plugged the drive into his laptop. The screen came to life, and the voices of Amanda, Lily, and Jake filled the room. I watched the reflection of the screen in his glasses, and I saw the moment when the truth hit him. His mouth dropped slightly, and the color drained from his face. When the recording ended, he sat there in silence for a long time. Then he whispered, "Dear God." I took a deep breath. "You always told me that truth and integrity were important, but you never looked at what was happening in our family," I said. His hand trembled on the mouse. "You could have embarrassed us tonight," he said, his voice low. "Because I didn't want to destroy you," I replied. "I just wanted you to see me." He looked up at me, really looked at me. It was as if we were seeing each other for the first time. Then he reached across the desk and placed his hand on mine. It was a clumsy gesture, but it was the first real connection we'd had in years. "I see you now," he said. Something inside me that had been locked up for so long broke free. It wasn't pain, it was a feeling of release. We stood there for a while, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. Then he closed the laptop, picked up the USB drive, and said, "Stay here." I followed him a short distance behind as he walked into the main hall. The music stopped when he appeared. He didn't raise his voice, but his presence commanded everyone's attention. "Amanda," he said, his voice cold. "You need to explain this." Amanda's face went from confusion to fear. "Henry, what are you talking about?" She stammered. "I watched the recording," he said. "I know everything." Lily's confident smile disappeared, and she looked at her mother, panicked. My father pointed at me. "She's my daughter, and she just saved our family from you too." The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda's face turned white, and Lily's eyes filled with tears. My father reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 envelopes. "One is for the divorce," he said. "The other is your dismissal from the company. You both need to leave." Amanda's voice cracked. "You're choosing her over us?" He shook his head. "I'm choosing the truth." I stood there, not moving, not gloating. I just watched as their world fell apart. After that, we left the mansion. The night air was cold, but it felt clean. As we drove away, my father said, "I used to think protecting you from pain was the right thing to do. But I was wrong. I was just avoiding the truth." I didn't say anything. There was nothing I needed to add. 3 months later, I visited my father at his new cabin by the lake. He was sitting on the porch, drinking coffee. He looked different, more relaxed. "You found it," he said with a smile. I followed the silence, I replied. We sat there, watching the ducks on the lake, and for the first time in my life, I felt at peace. A few weeks later, he called to tell me he'd watched my latest documentary. "It was hard to watch," he said, "but I'm so proud of you. You had the courage I didn't." That night, I stood on my balcony, looking at the city lights. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The frost that had followed me for so long was finally melting. I still film stories of women who have found their voices. The first screening of my latest project sold out a small theater. When the credits rolled, I saw my father in the back row, wiping his eyes. I used to think revenge was about making a big noise, about destroying. But now I know it can be quiet, like the light that slowly fills a dark room. I packed my camera bag for my next trip. The old USB drive on my shelf was no longer a weapon, it was a reminder that the truth will always find a way to be heard. Before I turned off the lights, my phone buzzed with a message from my father. "Proud of you, kid. Keep shining." I smiled and whispered, "Never again will I shrink to fit someone else's world."